All right, so this time I think it's important to talk about some of my experiences in the behavioral health field, um, as I am reaching for a degree in um, psychology, specifically the science of psychology. Um, I think working in environments where we are addressing behavioral issues, addiction issues, we tend to overlook a really, really important factor, and that is trauma. Many people who seek these services through their healthcare um, tend to be people who have experienced trauma. And I'm going to talk a little bit about chapter 17, 15, and 10 about stress and health and addiction, brain damage, and neuroplasticity being an important, essential thing in treating trauma, because we have to create those new neural pathways um, through neurogenesis and through new branching. Those who come in for a treatment of addiction, it's important to recognize that there isn't a positive, and there's something called the positive incentive theory of addiction, and it holds that there is a expected pleasure and a hedonic effect to the properties of using a drug. And I think that what that invites us to think about is not only is there, of course, a physical dependence element to addiction, but it is treating something deeper, usually an emotional wound. And people who have experienced trauma from the time they were young, when you're a child and you're experiencing maltreatment or severe forms of stress, your response in your hippocampus appears to be very susceptible to the effects of this stress. And that has been shown to reduce dendritic branching and in the hippocampus and reduce adult neurogenesis. So this carries from childhood into adulthood. And I think that's another important thing that we have to look at when treating addiction and behavioral health issues. Understanding these concepts increases awareness of the brain mechanisms and neuromechanisms when treating things like addiction and stress related disorders like PTSD. One advantage of this knowledge is we're um, carrying, we are coming to when someone's coming in for treatment, they are carrying these things. And we have to come to the reality that these issues are multi-factor. They're socioeconomic issues, they're a social issue. Um, and they need to be treated as such. We have to build new relationships and connections in order to allow individuals to heal. And interpersonal relationships is where that healing happens. If that's through a therapist or a group in a group setting, or both, this gives the individual the best chance at recovery from trauma. And so, another important thing to acknowledge from the field of neuroscience in behavioral and addiction management is neuroregeneration, the the regeneration of damaged neurons. So, two kinds of ways that this happens is reorganization of those neural circuits, is that they are either strengthened by existing connections, possibly through release of from inhibition, right, which would be held up by the stress response. And the other way is establishing new connections by collateral sprouting, literally creating these new pathways which are not there, and didn't have the opportunity to grow from trauma, from you know um, through the drug that is essentially helping that person not to look at the trauma, not to experience those emotions. PTSD is considered to actually cause physical and brain damage. So, any kind of emotional trauma, there is actually damage going on to the brain and body. And its most affected areas are the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and hippocampus. Their norepinephrine responses to subsequent stressors are abnormal for people who suffer from PTSD. Understanding in healthcare that PTSD can be a lifelong issue and is highly correlated with other personality disorders, health problems, and substance abuse. Knowing the characteristics of PTSD, which are flashbacks, nightmares, sleep disturbances, etc. Um, and so helping someone to recognize what those are. And I think it's important in our field to have multi-care teams. So people dealing with different aspects of an individual's life is important to have that network, to have that net to help these individuals recover, essentially pulling it out at the root and addressing these chronic conditions as something that needs all levels looked at. And without the field of neuroscience relating to the nervous system, we can't see the effects of addiction and what is going on in the brain as it's being damaged, the neuroplasticity is affected, and knowing that we can regenerate and treat them is essential. Therefore, knowing how these mechanisms work when behavioral changes occur can have a positive impact in the field. Thank you.